I realize we're not really in a void-based season right now, but handheld supernova just recently got a buff, 20% more PvE damage. So, okay, quick thing on that. The phrase handheld supernova is old terminology used specifically for a magnetic grenade that was being overcharged by a void warlock using chaos accelerant. However, with some very long ago updates, that term was removed from the game, and as far as I know, there's no in-game reference to the phrase handheld supernova anymore. But that's what it is. It's magnetic grenade overcharged with chaos accelerant. Yeah. Anyway, it's been a while since I have visited Void Warlock outside of my Briarbind setup from a couple of seasons ago, and even longer since I have messed with handheld supernova. With it getting this buff, I wanted to check and see if it was any good, and turns out, yeah, it's good. The exotic we're going to be using is Verity's Brow. Why not the Chaos Accelerant exotic Controverse Hold? Well, Controverse is fine, but for the purposes of this setup, we're looking for fewer but much harder hitting grenades versus more frequent ones that don't hit as hard. Devour does the bulk of our grenade regeneration, and while resisting incoming damage is pretty nice while charging up that grenade, it's not that vital. We're going to be on Void Warlock for the setup because Prismatic does not allow us to hold our grenades. Aspects, Chaos Accelerant and Feed the Void are like 99% locked in. You could use Child of the Old Gods if you wanted to instead of Feed the Void, because there are plenty of ways to get Devour in the first place, but the way that we build this results in very low class stat, and because if I wanted to do Child of the Old Gods, I would just use Briarbinds. Plus, it's more of an up-close and personal type setup, as we will discuss, whereas Child of the Old Gods is more of like a medium range setup, although you could use it at close range if you really wanted to. We're going to go with Magnetic Grenade for this initial setup because that's the thing that got buffed, right? You're free to choose whichever, I guess, but, you know, like, Magnetic Grenade got buffed. That's the whole point, and, like, our goal is really hard-hitting grenades to one-shot big targets, and Magnetic is the thing that does that. Your fragments will depend on the difficulty of the content you're in. In easier content where death is unlikely or maybe not as much of a penalty, you have a bit more freedom. Undermining weakening targets is definitely nice to have, but maybe not needed for stuff within, I would say, 20 levels of view. Persistence is globally useful. We want Devour, and we want it for as long as possible. You can get some overshield stuff from Repulsor Brace if you happen to use a weapon that has it as well. There's a couple of other spots to get overshields as well. Instability gives volatile rounds to your void weapons on a grenade kill, which should be happening somewhat frequently. Volatile rounds is a really good effect and provides anti-barrier tech, which is very handy. Your final slot at lower difficulty is pretty open. I went with Expulsion for some super stat and some more explosions, even though I don't really think it's needed too much. Vigilance could help with some of the glass cannonness of the build. That's pretty good too. And Harvest works to get some more orbs to spawn. Not that I think you'll have a huge problem with that. However, in more difficult content, you will want the ability to regain Devour much more easily than killing with an ability specifically, especially if it's on a long cooldown, which is why I recommend Echo of Starvation. Being without Devour and being without cooldowns to help you get it back brings this build to a screeching halt, and even with a very high grenade stat, you will still feel completely helpless until you have a grenade back. Being able to get a double kill with a weapon, probably a void weapon, scoop up an orb, and then be on your feet again will come in handy much more often than you might expect. Also, given the pretty fragile nature of this setup, even something like Obscurity to go invis on finisher is not out of the question. Being able to freely reposition or hit a target from the safety of invis is a pretty nice thing to have in your pocket. The artifact is going to have almost nothing for Void. Even Shield Crush is going to have a minimal effect because it's for overshields, which we won't have a ton of, and it boosts your melee, which is fine, but it's not really the point of the build. Those Void Breaches will help with getting Devour back and help with getting your Rift back, even as little energy as they will provide, since, you know, energy gains now scale based on your stats, and we're not really rocking with a lot of class. Speaking of which, stats-wise, we're looking to stack grenade pretty darn high, but weapons too, because weapon kills are the fuel for the Devour engine. If you're okay with not stacking weapons, I know the comfort of a Rift is quite appealing, so you could opt for that instead for some more defensive options. Gunner, Grenadier, and maybe one piece of Specialist armor if you want some class stat is likely how you're going to be building your armor set. Mods, we want a mix of grenade and weapon-based capabilities, ashes to assets, and definitely a siphon mod, likely Void, in the helm, grenade font, and maybe an orb generator in the gloves. I don't think you really need that. I think reload speed mod is probably a better choice. Chest is for resistances, maybe an ammo gen mod, depending on your setup. Maybe you're doing like a double special thing with Mint Retrograde and Choir of One. Boots, I think surges are good here, and class is going to be time dilation. Any sort of class ability mods completely depend on how much class stat you build into. I don't have that much, so I'm not really trying to mod for it. This build is incredibly simple to execute. Stack up death throws from your exotic by getting weapon kills, hold grenade, throw grenade. That's it. Death throws works with a meter now. It's no longer stack based, so you'll want to throw your grenade at maximum stacks if possible. You don't always need to throw at maximum stacks for more generic targets, but things like champions, you're going to want to, as the payoff is a one-shot a lot of the time. Weapons-wise, I was playing around with Mint Retrograde, Graviton Lance, or Reckless Oracle from Garden if I needed overload, and a Demo Killing Tally Corrective Measure from Vault of Glass. Demolitionist goes really well on your weapon of choice here, since it'll provide grenade energy on top of Devour's grenade energy to accelerate your gains. And I will say that effects like Volatile seem really good, but just keep in mind that only kills that your weapon gets counts towards death throws, and this does not include any volatile-based kills, even if the volatile came from your weapon. It's not the end of the world, fortunately, but it's something to keep track of while you're out gaming. If you don't have corrective measure, or honestly like any of these weapons, just find something void and throw it on, which should be somewhat easy unless you are a brand new player. Collective Obligation feels like it could fit in this setup as well, but I think that if you want to use Collective Obligation, you should build around it specifically and have that be the focus of your build, where you're like siphoning debuffs and all that kind of stuff. You do get access to Volatile and Weaken in this build, so like, you know, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but you may find yourself focused on one part of the build more than the other. Like, again, not the end of the world either. I just wanted to focus on the one thing for this particular setup. Plus, pulse rifles are more of a mid-range weapon, and if you're on magnetic grenade, you're going to want to be up close. I'm not going to stop you if you want to run it, though, because it's an amazing weapon, and if you can juggle both collective and the grenade stuff, which now that I'm really thinking about it, isn't probably that bad, go for it. There's also a more specific technique that you need to use with magnetic grenade in order to maximize its damage. When thrown normally, magnetic grenade, when charged up, will scatter in the air, which is fine for junk tier enemies. But for healthier targets, you want to kind of aim down by their feet, or literally be above them, like floating above them, kind of close. This will let more of the projectiles hit the target and makes a significant difference in your ability to one-shot bigger targets. It does depend on the enemy though, like a Hydra, for example, doesn't really have feet. I'd very much recommend aiming for the feet over any sort of floating in the air stuff though. Any sort of jumping in the air to throw your grenade, you're holding multiple buttons and it's very easy to let something slip too early or mistime a jump or something like that. Aiming for the feet was vastly better. In lower tier content, stuff in between 0 and even like 30 levels below, this is a pretty easy setup to run because there's not really that much to micromanage. The versatility of your grenade being able to kill any kind of target really helps with maximizing its use. You never need to feel guilty about a bad grenade throw because it works on all targets and because you're going to get it back pretty quickly. Magnetic grenade is a very short range attack, so you need to be okay with getting in the enemy's face. This build can be a nice blend of weapon and grenade gameplay. There's no pressure to spam your grenade if you're not in position to. but even in content that was 30 levels above me, I was using Graviton Lance and everything was just kind of dying to Graviton Lance itself, pushing my grenade usage to be a bit more selective to higher priority targets. If you find yourself wanting to actually use your grenade more, maybe go for a legendary weapon option instead. Once you break into more of that 30, 40, maybe 50 levels under the enemy type stuff, type content, you will start to see how fragile you are. This setup can be very glass cannon, and I know with Devour, it can feel like you're unstoppable, but burst damage will absolutely cook you, especially in more open arenas where it's more difficult to get up close to enemies. Devour is really your only defensive tool, and it only works when you're playing offense. This is also where I would switch to Fragments that give us more access to Devour. Getting that engine up and running is crucial if you ever lose it, as it's the main source of your build's power, grenade energy. Without Devour, it's kind of rough. Otherwise, I'm going to keep this one simple. I don't think there's much else to say about this build because of how straightforward it is. It's not reinventing the wheel, it's not overly complex, and we've had this ability in the game for a very long time. It's just that now it's been made a bit better with this recent buff, and it's really satisfying knocking out those bigger targets, even in content that's way above your pay grade. Let me know what variations you have been running for the setup, if any. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.